You are listening to eRadio, a Missed Apex production. We are electric. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eRadio show. Today's episode is called We're Back, Baby. I'm Matt Trumpets, and I'm joined by our intrepid journo, Chris_Stevens. Hey, Chris, how are we doing today?
I'm doing just great, and I'm so happy to be back doing eRadio and talking Formula E things again. It's been way too long.
It has been, and it's very exciting for you because we're already at the point where we're thinking about getting to preseason testing, aren't you?
Exactly. It's just a few days away. I'll be on a plane on Monday going over to Valencia.
And that is a beautiful thing. And at this point, I need to remind everyone that we are an independent podcast hosted on missedapexpodcast.com, bringing you race reviews, news, and tech from the paddock. You can watch episodes unfold on our live stream, search eRadio Show on YouTube, and subscribe to get a notification when we go live. And follow the show on Twitter at eRadio Show. So what say we jump right in and talk about some big, dirty news.
Big Dirty News.
And boy, is there a lot to talk about here. I would like to start, though, if I could, with the forest instead of the trees, as it were. We've had some changes. We have some new teams. And interestingly, we've got some manufacturers in some new garages, don't we?
Yeah, let's start off with the brand new team, HWA Race Lab, basically the Mercedes subdivision that is sort of holding the spot for Mercedes before they enter in season 6. So they're the new boys on the block. It's based in the HWA HQ in Germany. So it's very much still a Mercedes production, even though it's just the motorsporting subdivision, and they're running a Venturi powertrain, but they're running quite a close relationship with Venturi as well, who are basically giving them a sort of how to Formula E guide. So that when Mercedes come in next season, they're super prepared for it.
Okay, and I'm just going to go with the basic question. So is this sort of similar to the apt Audi kind of deal that happened when Audi became full partners with them? Or is this something different? And do we expect HWA to be more like Audi when they came in with apt, or more like Jaguar when they first showed up?
I think somewhere in the middle. It's not like the same as the Audi Schaeffler partnership, because that was all, to partner one team. Venturi are still going to be around when Mercedes come in, for example. So it's not quite like that relationship. But I imagine Mercedes will take a more Jaguar-esque approach when it comes to building their own powertrain for next season. Jaguar this season have got an all in-house built powertrain, and I can see Mercedes going the same way when it actually comes to their turn to doing it. But for now, they're just running the Venturi software while they sort of get to grips with how to handle a Formula E race day.
So we've got HWA. They're coming in. Basically, they're the proxy for Mercedes. They're working with Venturi. Do we know who's going to be driving for them?
We know that Gary Paffett will be driving for them, the DTM driver, 2005 DTM champion. Could be about to win the DTM championship for a second time this weekend in Hockenheim. So keep an eye out for that, everybody. That's between him, Paul di Resta, and Rene Rast, actually. So that should be quite an interesting weekend. It'd be really good for Paffett as well to sort of come in on a high note, as it were, with that as well. We don't know who his teammate will be. I was, sort of assuming that whoever at Venturi lost out on their drive between Eduardo Mortara and Mauro Engel would end up in the HWA. And in this instance, it's Mauro Engel. However, Sam Smith at eRacing 365, amazing journalist. If you haven't, checked out his stuff, you absolutely have to, because he's just one of the most insightful people in the Formula E paddock. Thinks that Stoffel Van Dorn is going to be getting that drive. We know he's sort of left out in the cold in Formula One. So there could be an HWA drive on the cards for him.
And that would actually be a really good fit, because I was going to ask you, since Paffett is coming from DTM, how have other drivers who have come from DTM type series where you do have high downforce and tire degradation do when they move to an open wheel series? Well, I don't know if we can call it open wheel anymore with the new chassis, but when they move to a series where managing your electrics and your regen is such an important part of it, do we see him maybe having more of a struggle than somebody, let's say, like Stoffel?
I think that Formula E is so different to anything else that it doesn't really matter what you come from. I think WEC is the only comparable thing because it's also hybrid. Perhaps but you can throw Formula One in there as well because it's hybrid. So I guess if Van Dorn were to get the drive, he would understand the regenerative systems, as it were, perhaps better than Paffett. Although, of course, he spent multiple years at McLaren helping develop their Formula One cars. So it's not like he's a complete stranger to this stuff. So I think in a way it makes sense, but I do think that WEC drivers and these days probably more experienced Formula One drivers would understand the systems better. I kind of disagree though that Van Dorn would make a great addition to the grid. It's the same thing I thought about when Felipe Massa joined, which is that it doesn't do Formula E's image of being a sort of dumping ground of failed Formula One drivers any good. Especially when you look at the current grid as well. Like last season, it got amazing. This season, it's just taken another step towards being absolutely brilliant as well. But there are still the naysayers who say, "Oh, they're just ex Formula One drivers who never got anywhere."
Okay, so now you want to take exception with failed Formula One drivers. I don't think you could really call Massa a failure if you look at his career. And frankly, if you look at Van Dorn's entire career in single seaters, well, he certainly crushed GP2 to a level that other people of recent vintage have not. I don't think we ever have seen his full talent as a driver on display in McLaren for reasons that can only be described as McLaren-esque. And
Yeah,
so I would make an exception for Van Dorn. I think he lost out on the musical chairs in Formula One, but he has talent as a driver. And
I
yeah.
completely agree. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't think these guys are failed Formula One drivers. That's just what a lot of people say to me. And I have to sit there for 20 minutes explaining why they're wrong. And I am also one of the biggest defenders of Stoffel Van Dorn as well. I got in a huge argument with somebody on Facebook quite recently about him. So I would very much like to see him, racing something competitive for sure. But it's just the image thing that kind of gets me a little bit from time to time. But hopefully, Formula E is creating its own stars now, and we're hearing less and less of that.
And that's a good thing. And certainly the excitement over the changes that we'll get to later is part of what's helping this build. But let's move on. What other teams do we have? What other changes are there amongst the teams? Some people have new power units, I hear.
Of course, the big thing that's been developing over the past year or so has been the parting of DS and Virgin Racing, and DS moving to the Techeetah Formula E team. And it's quite an exciting thing. They've kept the lineup of John O'Byrne and Andre Lotterer, which will be great. I think Lotterer in his second season should come on quite strong, and we know he can challenge Verne on a good day. So that should be a really, really competitive pairing now. But they're driving the DS E-Tense FE19 in that car now. So they have manufacturer status. And, people have been saying to me, well, DS Virgin didn't do incredibly well last season. So why should DS Techeetah be any different? And of course, the big thing, for this season, the manufacturers have been working on this powertrain for the last 18 months to 2 years, much more so than they were working on the season 4 powertrain. They basically just did the season 3 powertrain again with a couple of tweaks. Most of the manufacturers, anyway. The Audi were really the only ones to step it up a gear, really, or take 2 of them out, as it were. But so we've got DS moving in.
Really?
They've got that. They've still got that great support team as well of Zhao and Rossiter and Della Rosa.
Yeah.
So Techeetah as a team is phenomenal. And you just know that with those extra 15 days of testing, they can do great things. Of course, that leaves Virgin Racing out in the cold a little bit.
Yeah, well, to me, the person you're leaving out here is Mark Preston. I mean, they've already done some testing where I thought I saw them on Twitter. But
Yeah.
the organization of the team is fantastic, and they really seem to, at the end of last season, they seem to really have it dialed in. And when you add a manufacturer status to that, then I'm really excited to see them go head to head with Audi this year, I gotta say.
Totally, 100%. Of course, all the teams have completed their 15 days private testing now because the homologation day was on October the 1st. So at this point, they're all in the simulators prepping and for preseason testing, and then they'll go back into the simulators after that as well. But of course, so we've got to tie up the knot of Virgin Racing, which is now Envision Virgin Racing, Envision, who hold a majority sharehold in the team now, as they have done since the Paris E-Prix. Actually. And so I think that's now become more of an official thing, title sponsor of the team. They are an Audi customer now, which I think is not bad for them because, last season it was the best powertrain on the grid. And if they can sort of keep up that momentum, that's going to be a really, really great powertrain for them. The only issue is that, of course, the lack of testing. Now, we saw Techeetah really, really struggled in the first few races last season without testing. That one extra day in Marrakesh turned their entire season around. And I think this season, in particular, with the brake-by-wire systems that we got, they're going to be so difficult to get in the right point. It's going to be so niche that not having any testing outside of Valencia is going to be a big, big blow. So that's something that Sam Bird and his new teammate Robin Fraintz have got to get a hold of.
And that has to be one of the most exciting pairings that we're going to see with Sam Bird and Robin Fraintz in the same team. And it's good to have him back in the sport. He was seen to be a very popular driver with the fans, and I would assume with the other drivers as well.
He was unbelievably well, not so much with Sebastian Buemi after Montreal, but that's I'm sure they're live and let die on that one. But there's I'm hugely excited to see Robin Fraintz back. It was a crime that he wasn't on the grid last season because of BMW coming into the Andretti team more and more and wanted to put one of their drivers in the car. And so I'm really, really glad that he's found a way back into Formula. Actually, it's got nothing to do with him being an Audi driver and Virgin having an Audi powertrain. There's no link to that at all. Robin's been trying to find a way back into Formula E since he got pushed out. And it just so happened to be there was an opening at Virgin that he could take, which of course means that Alex Lynn is probably going to be left out on this grid for this season, which is a bit of a shame, but he just wasn't really gelling with Formula E on a full-time basis. So I think it's a fair replacement, especially for somebody like Robin Fraintz, who is one of the best drivers in the series, in my opinion. And partner that with Bird, that's an amazing lineup. They cannot point the finger at the drivers this season.
No, and one would assume with the Audi powertrain, the weight issues they were suffering will have gone away, because I assume that a lot of that was just down to the powertrain they were stuck with.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a team, Virgin Racing had done a great job, but it was always the powertrain, the DS powertrain, that was always holding them back because it lacked, that efficiency in the race. Pretty good in qualifying, but not so much in the race. So that should be, the Audi powertrain last season was not so strong in qualifying, fantastic in the race. So we could see that swing again. But of course, this is all speculation because none of us have actually seen these cars out on track yet.
Yes, and we will be looking to you for those Twitter updates from Valencia. So do not shirk your social media duties.
Oh, I will not. I will be tweeting like mad. Go for it at @cstevens_journo.
All right. So who else are we going to talk about then?
Let's talk about BMW i Andretti now. The fully fledged BMW arrival at Andretti. The long-awaited one as well, because Andretti have just been in this mire ever since the failed powertrain design, the ATEC 01 from season 2, that they abandoned after 2 weeks of testing and just reverted back to the season 1 car. And since then, they've just been playing catch up and always been a step behind. Now with BMW coming on board, this is the reset button. I'm expecting them to make a big step this forward. Keeping Antonio Felix da Costa really, really strong. No complaints there. He's been very, very good. And Alexander Sims now joining him, another BMW driver. No real surprises there, although apparently Bruno Spengler was doing a lot of the testing for them, but he's not actually got the seat. And actually, Sims himself was quite surprised because he said, well, Bruno's the one who's been testing the car a lot, so why am I getting the drive? But it's a great addition to the grid, I feel. He's a proper EV nerd. And he had a really great career in junior single seaters that people seem to have forgotten about. So I think it'd be a good addition to the grid.
Yeah, well, and it will just, I think we all just have our fingers crossed that their performance will match their expectations, unlike last year, where they really just sort of seemed to languish a little bit.
Well, yeah, they were easily the slowest car on the grid, apart from the rare occasion when Da Costa could throw it into Superpole if the track conditions allowed for it. But I spoke to Michael Andretti in New York, and he said they want to be winning, the first race in Riyadh, which I think is maybe slightly ambitious. But I love the ambition that he's got. It's going to be hopefully a big turnaround from the last few seasons.
Yes. Well, who else will be looking for a turnaround is the former Renault, now Nissan team. And there's some excitement there because we don't know much, do we?
No, we yet to see the car, really. And I'm sure Nissan have been sort of tapping into the Renault resources and their expertise to try and help them in their first season. Although I do think that it's not going to be, it's not going to be plain sailing for them. I'd be surprised if they went for the championship with what Nissan offer them straight away. But we know EDAMS is a solid foundation of a race team. It's about whether Nissan can deliver the goods. And of course, we know how good Sebastian Buemi is. I know he took a bit of a drop last season when the car wasn't quite there for him. But I think we'll start to see the old Buemi come back, as we did towards the end of last season. We saw glimpses of the old Buemi there with a new teammate, Alex Albon, which I'm hugely excited about, because it's not only is it a good racing driver that's come in, and EDAMS using the other DAMS team that's in Formula 2, but it's a switch from Formula 2. We've got this young racing driver who's been coming up through the junior formula and has decided Formula E is the path for him. He's saying, I'm not going to do Formula 1. I'm going to try my hand in Formula E. And that's the kind of market I think Formula E needs to be aiming at now, as like an alternative to Formula 1.
But I mean, all we would have to do is look at somebody like, say, Esteban Ocon, who arguably the best of the youngsters that entered, and he's out. Mercedes, he seems to be like Mercedes' pick to take over from Bottas or Hamilton when they finally retire, and they can't even get him a seat right now in the sport. Yeah, if I was a youngster coming from F2 or previously GP2, I'd absolutely consider it, because in a Formula E car, I could be winning races and there's more room on the grid. So you really have room to be there by merit that politics in Formula 1 would be keeping you out.
I would agree. There's still a little bit of politics in Formula E, but a lot less. It's a lot less savage. You can still be a good driver and get a decent drive, which is not always the case in Formula 1, I feel.
All right. But Nissan, they did surprise us, because Buemi wasn't really even a nailed-on certainty, was he?
No, of course, there was all the rumors about the conflict with Toyota racing for another Japanese manufacturer. Of course, the Toyota contract would always take precedent over any other contracts, as it did when New York and 6 Hours in the Nürburgring clashed, that he believes cost him the title to win season 3. So there was a bit of a worry about that, but Sebastian's always had a contract with EDAMS for this season. I believe there's some sort of marketing stipulations on his contract, so I don't think he's allowed to promote with Nissan, as it were. So I think any media stuff will be Alex Albon and not Sebastian. But it's just good to see him on the grid still.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about HWA's ostensible partner and powertrain provider, Venturi. They have what looks to be a formidable pair coming in. And they have the official Susie Wolf as their team principal. How is that going?
It's tough to say, really, in terms of how competitive it will be. Certainly the lineup of Felipe Massa and Eduardo Mortara is quite a nice one. It's a bit mouthwatering, isn't it? Of course, I think Felipe is bringing with him quite a large fan base, and people are going to give Formula E a chance because he's driving in it. And Mortara, we know how good he is in Formula E. Of course, he got that podium finish. Should have been a race win on his debut weekend in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But although he never quite reached that same height, that the ability was still there. And so I think if Venturi can harness that, they'll get a really great season out of it. And of course, you've got to remember this is a relatively small team fighting the likes of DS and Audi and Jaguar. It's going to be very difficult for them to try and compete with that, especially with all these big changes coming up. And I think that's quite an open door for them to try and get a head start on everyone. But of course, I think the resource compared to the giant manufacturers isn't, it's not going to be quite the same. So, I think Venturi, they're going to be kind of trying to look at themselves as the best kind of small manufacturer, almost like the best independent team, although of course there aren't really independent teams in Formula E. So I think that's going to be quite good. Of course, got ZF handling the inverter and the motor as well as the gearbox now. Still ROM handling their silicon carbide inverters. That's catching on a bit now, these much lighter inverters. So it's amazing. They showed on the Jaguar live stream launch there how big some of these parts used to be and how big they are now. And you could fit like 100 of these new parts in place of how big the old one was. It's incredible how much smaller and lighter these components are now.
Yeah, it is. But this is kind of why the sport exists in a way, is for this sort of development to happen, for the parts to be proved out before they're switched on to road cars and hit the mass market. What I'm curious about, though, is at Venturi now we have Susie Wolf. We have a big Mercedes connection. You're describing them as a small team, but it seems like to me they might be benefiting from a lot of data and feedback from HWA and perhaps some resources that they've not previously had available to them. They could be a real sleeper in this.
Well, here's the thing. You get 15 days private testing as a manufacturer. You get an extra 7 if you are running a customer team. So that means Venturi and Audi will be getting an extra 7 days of testing. And like I said earlier, any extra testing is going to be so beneficial and just help you nail in those brake-by-wire issues, help you nail the setup on the car. The brand new car that nobody understands. You need to know what a little tweak of the wing here will do, or if this camber change, what will that do? Of course, they're not doing these things on proper street courses, but it's good to know how things will affect the car, because you can then apply it to a racing scenario. The sooner you're able to hit the ground running in an FP1 session, then that's how you get the ball rolling, because you get so little practice time that all your preparation going into the weekend defines your race weekend. And having those extra 7 days of testing could prove pivotal in the early races of the season. We could see a huge turnaround as the season progresses.
Well, and that's part of the excitement of it, because it's so limited as the season goes on. It gives people who start out behind a chance to catch up. And team-wise, who do you want to talk about next?
Let's go for Neo, because they are doing something that I've been hoping was going to happen for a while, and that's to give Tom Dillman a full-time Formula E drive, which is just so what he deserves, because these one-off races, the half season he did with Venturi in season 3 was just mega. He's been amazing. And he was wasted, only doing the odd stand-in race. So I'm so glad he's been able to find a full-time drive that's going to allow him to show off the talent that he's got. And especially alongside Oliver Turvey, this is another strong lineup that I think people won't quite realize how good this lineup is until they sort of hit the track. But these are 2 very good drivers for Formula E. So whether Neo deliver the goods this time is going to be the question. Apparently, I think Sam Smith again was saying this, that they've dropped the twin motor layout for this season.
That's a good thing, because it just was not really working for him.
Yeah, I mean, it worked on certain circuits, but they still never were the quickest car. So it seems like they're breaking the mold for themselves, as it were. So they need to follow the crowd a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think the data shows that the weight penalty is just not worth the occasional advantage that you gain from it.
Exactly. It wasn't incredibly efficient in the race. And man, Oliver managed to pull out some amazing races in that car last season, despite all of that. So that's why I'm really excited to see what they can do with a good competitive car.
All right, let's talk about Audi, the team champion, the constructors champion last year. What have they got for us? Aside from they've got the exact same drivers.
Yeah, well, why would you change it? You know,
Indeed.
what is it? 2 wins apiece last season, although it should have been 3-2 in Daniel's favor, really, if we're thinking about it. The Audi e-tron FE05 is the car we know the most about, to be honest. Audi have been quite open with well, compared to other teams, not as open as maybe they were 2 or 3 years ago with their powertrains, but we know that 90% of the components are new. Overall, the powertrain is 10% lighter than it was last season, and that was already, the best powertrain on the grid. So these are good steps. Retaining the single-speed gearbox, which I'm quite surprised by, to be honest, because I would have thought that maybe the extra power and speed would, warrant needing a second gear. We've talked about how the Renault powertrain and other people who have used that powertrain or a similar design, they've had to balance the torque out of a corner against the top speed. Now, so far, they've been able to do it. That car has won a championship every single, a Renault powertrain has won the championship every single year, be it, the teams or the drivers or both in some instances. And so they've been able to harness that quite well. Whether with the extra speed of the Gen 2 car, that's still going to be quite as effective. Of course, that's going to be one thing we're going to have to keep our eye on during the season.
Well, okay, so you bring it up. I assume you have the receipts. Do we know who's running multi-gear gearboxes?
Not yet. We know so little about the
Okay.
powertrains. They're really holding their cards close to their chest this year. But of course, that's going to be one of the things I'll be desperate to find out during preseason testing. I'll be listening out for those gear changes. A good way to tell is actually if they're coming into the pit lane.
Okay.
And if they're pulling up in the garage and you hear that cha 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 noise, that's the gears rattling together. So if it doesn't make that noise, it's direct drive.
Okay. Well, that's something that we'll be listening for at the first race, because that's going to be the first thing that we're going to have access to, because they're not covering testing.
Well, I'm sure they'll put some videos up,
right,
of cars coming in and going around, all that stuff.
Yeah, but I would say in general, if you're talking motorsports, lighter is better, and this is probably and simpler, not prone to failure, fewer things to break. So I can understand that. Anything else we need to know about that car?
More efficient as well, of course. Running a single gear. Still got the Schaeffler MGU, dubbed the MGU-03, it said in the press release, which was a real imaginative name. Other than that, there's not much else to know about that car. Hopefully we'll know a lot more about it after preseason testing, whether they are still the cars to beat.
Yes. Well, speaking of beating, a team that made a very big late season surge was Jaguar. What are they up to? What do we know about them?
This is a potential first for FE, but they have built their powertrain entirely themselves. So far, every other manufacturing team has used a partner or a relationship with some other company to help design their powertrain. Venturi would be a prime example, using ZF and Realm. Even Renault have used other people to design their inverters and their gearboxes, etc. Jaguar could be the first to have done it entirely themselves.
Wow.
And that, not only is that quite cool and amazing, but it gives them such a big advantage in terms of packaging everything, because they don't have to make compromises. We talk in Formula One all the time about how McLaren never wanted to change their chassis to accommodate the Honda engine.
Right.
And they failed. Toro Rosso came along and said, we'll do whatever you want us to. And they're succeeding very, very well. Same principle here. If you could package anything the way you want it to, you've got such a huge advantage. You're able to lower the center of gravity, get better weight distribution and bring the overall weight down. It's a huge gain. And there are 800 new parts on that car, which is just quite a staggering statistic, really. So I'm quite excited to see what Jaguar, still running Nelson Piquet Jr. and Mitch Evans, can do in that car, because that's still another great lineup that we're running down all of this lot saying that they're great pairings. But the truth is, we've just got a very good grid this year.
Well, there's a very high standard of driver. And I think, this is the other end of the contraction in motorsports that's happening, because the sponsorship isn't what it was 15, 20, 30 years ago. At a certain point, you have to be more efficient. There's more drivers coming out every day who are talented. And it just leaves any series that's become successful. And I think by its own metrics, by its own intent, Formula E is successful as a business. We could argue viewership numbers and this and that, but in terms of its stated purpose, it is completely succeeded, and I think beyond everybody's initial expectations. It's fair to say.
Oh, definitely.
So you're at a point where all of the good drivers, if they can't find another home, would very much like to be part of this. So yeah, I don't think we're wrong to say it's a whole bunch of really great pairings. And Evans in particular was really, really looking strong at the end of last season. I'm kind of excited to see him in a car that's not hobbled by weight as his last season one was.
And last season, I was saying it's the best grid that Formula E had, but there was still a weak point or two. We had question marks about some drivers that were then later confirmed as the season went along. Luca Filippi being one of them. I don't think people quite expected Alex Lynn to struggle quite as much, given how much he impressed in his one-off race in New York. And Tom Blomqvist, he was a bit of a question mark as well. But so far, of the drivers that are confirmed, we still have 4 seats to confirm. But so far, I'm not seeing anybody that I would think they're not going to do quite well in this series. Maybe Felipe Massa might be the biggest question mark, but that's still, quite a good, that's still quite a good, benchmark to have, I feel.
Yes, we'll just ask Kimi Räikkönen about that, I suppose. All right. Well, speaking of question marks, shall we move on to those teams we know slightly less about?
Yeah, so Dragon Racing is one of them. Again, haven't seen the car yet. And given that we're only a few days from testing, I imagine they'll do a launch in Valencia. But they just today, on Thursday, we're recording this, announced, confirmed really, that Jose Maria Lopez is sticking around with the team. No real surprises there. I don't think it was ever in doubt. He's been a great addition, especially when he came in last minute, no testing, and pretty much trounced Jerome D'Ambrosio in Marrakesh.
Yeah.
D'Ambrosio came back at him, of course, and I think D'Ambrosio rather unfairly has been pushed out of that team because he's been, as good. I think Marrakesh maybe was a bit of a one-off, but he's been as good as Lopez. I think a little bit more consistent as well. I think Lopez had a tendency to throw out the scenery a little bit last season. Which you would expect, given he didn't really have any testing. So in the course of the early races, things were going to be a little bit rough. Although Jerome hopefully will find a home elsewhere. But we are expecting Maximilian Gunther to step up from his role as test and reserve driver and become Lopez's teammate. I think that'll be announced next week. Of course, that'll be another driver making the switch from F2 to FE.
Well, it seems to be a trend. Now, I'll tell you one thing that did surprise me, and I guess it made me, I was happy for him, but we know that Felix Rosenqvist has moved to IndyCar. So do we know who's taking his place?
Oh, we don't know anything about Mahindra, really. I don't think anyone knows anything. Can I just say,
okay.
From the bottom of my heart, I will miss Felix Rosenqvist if he's not in the Formula E paddock next season, which is very, very likely. I am absolutely delighted for him, though, to have gotten that IndyCar drive, because it is just absolutely what he deserves. As much as I will miss him, and he was one of the most exciting drivers in Formula E, and I will miss him, but damn, good on you, dude. That's really awesome. But of course, it leaves quite a big hole in Mahindra, and I think quite a few of us were expecting Nick Heidfeld to announce his retirement in New York. We know it has been confirmed now that he has an ambassador and development role at Pininfarina, who, of course, are working with Mahindra to design an electric hypercar for the road. But that might see him take a step back in his racing role, but if they need somebody to fill a seat, it could be a Felipe Massa at Williams 2017 scenario where he says bye-bye to the team, albeit this time a little bit more quietly. And then they call him up and say, actually, do you mind just popping back for another season? So that could well be the case. But I mentioned D'Ambrosio potentially getting a home elsewhere. I think it could be Mahindra. And what a step up that would be for him.
It would be, and it would be good because he seems to in the early seasons he was very, very impressive, and he just seems to have really plateaued with Dragon. So it would probably be a good change of scenery if nothing else.
Double race winner in Formula E, albeit via Lucas di Grassi retirements. But you would have to say that the car has not been there for him the last couple of seasons. He's done what he can, and of course got the podium in Zurich as well. Did a really great job in what has been a very, very much an underperforming car. So I think, boost him up the grid and he'll be winning races proper this time.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the calendar because we have some interesting changes to the calendar this year too.
Yeah, of course, Riyadh is the big well-known addition to the calendar. Don't think we really need to go much more into that. But of course, Sanya is the other big one. So we have another Chinese race. Or although, can we really call it a Chinese, second Chinese race if Hong Kong isn't technically China? But anyway, we got a Hong Kong and Sanya now in China, which is great. And they'll be sort of not back to back, but they're next to each other in the calendar. So it means, formally kind of hits the Asian market a little bit more. Still want to see a race in Tokyo or Yokohama, to be honest. I think a Yokohama race is actually the preferred location than Tokyo. I think Tokyo is just a little bit too busy to close off some streets for a Formula E race, to be honest.
Yeah, it probably is. But on the other hand, it's Japan. So one never knows. They are kind of nuts for motorsports there. I see that Santiago might be back on the calendar. So what's going on with that?
It is back on the calendar. If you remember, if you listen to our Santiago race review at the beginning of this year, you will know that it didn't quite go down well with the locals. Apparently, the Formula E staff were threatened by the locals, spat at, had rubbish thrown at them. It wasn't pretty. So what they've done is they've moved it aside. Basically, they've done what Berlin did after they were told they couldn't have it on the Alexanderplatz anymore and moved it into a private spot. It's a park. I think it's used for sort of military parades and stuff, but it's sort of private land. It's not really on the streets of New York, on the streets of Santiago even.
Well, fair enough.
Why did New York just suddenly pop into my head? Well, I get that technically isn't on the streets of New York either. That one is in the Red Hook harbor. And that's
I'm going to take issue. That is a real street. It is a street name you can find on Google Maps. So yeah, mostly it's in a car park, but technically there's a tiny little bit of it that is on a street. So having said that, off you go.
All right, lawyered. Okay. But it is a new venue, and I got to say the track looks fantastic. Somebody at Top Gear wrote an article slamming it, even though all we have is an outline picture to go off of. But I really like the layout. I think it's quite cool. It's got kind of a little bit of an oval bit as well. Some nice hairpins, good little quick bit in there as well. I think Santiago will be quite a nice addition. They say they've listened to the neighbors this time, so hopefully that this one goes down a bit better.
Yeah, and then I got to say, for me personally, the biggest disappointment is they are still wimping out at Monaco.
I'm much to Alejandro Agag's disappointment, I feel as well, because Alejandro is really pushing for the full FE, the full F1 layout.
Right.
I think there is an issue of having to make certain changes to the circuit to accommodate Formula E that are slightly different to Formula One. Then, of course, they only have 2 weeks to change back to sort of Formula One spec. I think that's one of the issues. But at the same time, I still feel like the FA desperately want to keep any kind of comparison between FE and F1 well out the way. So that's why we're still probably going to keep the short Monaco lap, which is a big shame. To be honest, it is.
Because I tell you what, when you see cars actually passing each other on the Monaco circuit, you're not really going to care exactly how fast they're going. Is what I come up with.
Well, people who love F2 so much don't really care how quick the cars are going, do they? They just love the fact that they're racing each other fantastically. Although for some reason, when it comes to FE, that it's like, oh, the speed is an issue all of a sudden. Like, who cares, really?
Okay. And then we've had a change in Switzerland as well.
Yeah, it was unfortunate, this one, really, because the date that Zurich was given, or the one that formally was given, it was going to clash with quite a few other events going on in Zurich, including one of them being the LGBT Pride Parade and the Zurich Parade. I can't remember what the sort of German Swiss word for it was, which is a little bit unfortunate. But this is to be confirmed. But I think Bern is expected to be the favorite to replace it, which I think is they don't have capital cities in Switzerland, do they? But this is sort of what this is another major city.
Right. Yeah, it is. Like I've actually been there. Anyway, anything else we need to know about the calendar?
There's a race on my birthday, which is nice for me.
Oh.
Berlin, May 25th. Happy with that. I feel like we should talk about the format, though, because, of course, we're switching to timed races.
Okay.
As opposed to, a lap distance.
So
I think could catch a few people out.
It very much could. So my question is this going to be our classic time plus one lap?
I'd actually have to go back and double check the rates on that one. They haven't released them yet.
Okay.
They've just kind of said that it's like, it's a 45-minute race. I don't think it's plus one lap, to be honest. I think it's just the 45 minutes and then that's it. But of course, what that means is that people are you're not any longer just trying to work to your plan, are you? You've got to think, how quick are the leaders going to go? How many laps in this race are we actually going to end up doing?
Yes.
And of course, if you sort of cross the line with like a second to go, you sort of mistime it, then you've got to do a whole extra lap. And if you don't have the energy for that, you're screwed.
Yeah, well, it will change the strategic thinking. And especially if we have safety cars or virtual safety cars, we could see some very, very quick ends of races as people suddenly have a lot more power left than they had anticipated if it was green lights to checkers.
I think if you got a safety car, people would still go at the same pace. Obviously, with the way it's at the moment, because you're going to do the same number of laps regardless. When you have a safety car, you spend a bit more of your energy to kind of level it out to where you would be by the end of the stint and try and get through those laps quicker. But I think now if you get a safety car, you'll probably try and still run at the same rate and actually reduce the number of laps you have to do so that by the end of the race, you've got maybe a bit more extra energy to spend should you need it.
Well, this is my thinking. Safety car laps are so very, very much longer that by running a shorter distance, you should have more energy per lap left.
Do you know, I'll be fascinated to find out. And there is something I'll be asking every team as well.
Yeah.
Do you remember Tita's trick about how they saved energy under the safety car that nobody else seemed to be able to do?
No, tell us.
I still don't know what it was, and it's bugging me. I want to know what that car was doing that nobody else was, that meant they were saving an extra 2 or 3% under the safety car. It's something we first noticed in Santiago. They suddenly had loads more energy than the other cars, even though they'd really only done 1 or 2 racing laps. So I want to know if other people have been able to do that now.
The thing that would immediately come to mind would be to have some kind of neutral setting that entirely disengages the gearbox and just lets it roll without using any power whatsoever.
Well, yeah, like a low power mode. So that was the kind of theory that they were just kind of turning the power down on that one.
Yeah, well, it could be, but it will certainly the first races with entirely new rules, and I noticed you've not even brought up the extra boost and the sprinters line is what I'm going to call it because that's what I know it as from cycling. That you're going to be required to take, also throwing a monkey wrench into the strategy for people.
Yes, of course, because you do have to use it, and that's going to eat up a lot more of your energy. The reason I haven't brought it up really is because we still don't know an awful lot about it, to be honest, and I don't think we really will until just before the season starts, because all of the sort of bits you have to take to get your hyper boost, still being dubbed, are going to vary from race to race. The amount of time you're going to get it for is going to vary race to race. And the time loss is going to vary from race to race as well. So, of course, and that's all to stop teams just working out when the best time to take it is.
I think it doesn't matter, because I'll tell you what these new rules make me think of is when they changed the rules to qualifying in Formula One for those couple of races. Do you remember what an epically exciting disaster it was, and thoroughly entertaining to watch? No team be able to figure it out correctly. And I think I'm expecting utter and sheer chaos a la the very first season of Formula E, where nobody knew what was going on. It was fantastic. And I'm really excited for season 5 for that reason alone. But if we're going to talk about new things, why don't we run down the specs about the car before we're out of here?
Yeah, a bit of a refresher course for you. 250 kilowatts of qualifying power. That's up from 50 kilowatts from the last season. So that equates to about 337 brake horsepower. And of course, that'll be 200 kilowatts in the race. So the race power now actually matches the qualifying power from last season, and 250 kilowatts of regen. So that means in a race, for the first time, the amount of regen you have exceeds the power. Now, of course, they'll go up to 250 if they use the hyper boost and the fan boost and whatever. But this is going to be there's going to be a lot left lifting and coasting. It's going to be much harder, much faster racing. So overall, it's going to be an awful lot quicker. We've talked about the brake by wire as well, and that's going to, I think, take away an element of the driver making a difference. I think, back when it was all manual brakes, we've seen so many guys really struggling with the brakes. Locking up a lot, and especially because the brakes, the Brembo brakes are not sensational, I would say, because they have maybe have a tendency to, one heats up quicker than the other on one side. So you got maybe your right brake is really good, and then your left brake is still not up to temperature. So you apply the force that you need, and then your left one just locks up instantly. And that could still be an issue this season. With the brake by wire isn't going to solve that issue for you. All it can really do is work out the regen for you. So long as they've got that right, you'll get a much more consistent feel on the pedal, and so long as you can work the Brembo brakes properly. I think that's something Nelson Piquet was struggling with quite a lot this last season, as he was with the tires as well. He hated that second generation of tires that was used for the last 2 seasons. He's very much looking forward to the softer compound being used for this season that could very well bring tire wear into the equation for a Formula E race.
Well, for the first time, their tires have been very, very solid and long lasting up until now.
Exactly. It could just be that, it's not going to be like, they're shredding, like a Formula One tire, but it could just be that saving that little bit of performance could make a difference by the end of the race.
All right, then. Anything else before we roll on out of here?
I think we just need to, get back into the swing of things now. I'm properly excited for Formula E coming back. Properly excited for this is the reset button. This is like the last 4 seasons never happened. Forget everything you knew about Formula E, because it's just gone. This is a brand new. There is maybe the nuts and bolts from last season are the only thing that you could carry over between previous Formula E and new Formula E. It's going to be wild.
Yes, and don't forget, we'll be providing more insight into Formula E than ever before. Race reviews the Tuesday after each race, so search eRadio Show on YouTube and follow us on Twitter at eRadio Show. Where should we find you, Mr. Stevens, and what do you want to plug before we go?
I'm going to plug my Twitter again at cstevens_jono. All the Formula E updates you'll see on there, and on my website, Formula Spy, as well. And I did do a couple of Autosport bylines about Formula E stuff. You can go check them out in the Formula E section of autosport.com.
You are gradually bringing prestige to the show, and for that we thank you. As for me, I'm at MattPT55 on the Twitters, and remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scars, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been eRadio Show.